Chapter 6, Spirit, Afterlife and Religion. So because humans and all material life contains two elements, matter and spirit, there's been an ongoing struggle for dominance in our personal lives. This is a struggle where consequences reach far beyond life on earth that reaches into our afterlife. An afterlife. This is where science and the what-if theory become really interesting and important. If scientists are to admit the possibility of the existence of spirit as an element embedded in all matter and also in our human DNA, an element invisible and eternal, then they must logically admit that when we die, that eternal spirit lives on. And living on, resurrection and eternal life is the defining aspect and chapter in the story of man. To put this aspect of our humanity in focus, as it were, we must look again at our individual aims, operations and motivations. We have a spirit entity, our soul, if you will. This is a persona that has no material needs. Its contribution to our lives is to guide and influence our material actions. It has a basis in love, care and altruism. The other part of our humanism and the dominant factor is our material persona. This is inherited from the cosmos and material world that evolved us. The dominant aspect of this persona is survival of the fittest, which, when guided by the force of intelligence that guides both personas, translates to the emergence and dominance of power. Thus, a human being is essentially a being that is constantly fighting an internal mental war. The predominant aspect is the material of survival, pleasure and power, with this aspect tempered by a spirit that essentially grounded in love and altruism. Sometimes the power element completely dominates the spirit, and this is where the ultimate disaster occurs. This is an aspect we will discuss later. The realization by man of the existence of spirit is an atavistic knowledge that wasn't taught but emerged in humans all over the world, no matter how primitive or isolated. The problem with this knowledge lies in the knowledge of its existence with no understanding of what it actually is. This misunderstanding led to its being placed outside the human experience as something greater and more powerful than ourselves. It was judged on the power factor of our human persona. It was something out there greater than ourselves and infinitely powerful. Something out there greater than ourselves, greater than the chiefs, greater than the king, greater than the emperor, greater than all the power structures on earth, controller of everything and creator of all. Such a vision could only lead to one logical conclusion. We had to get such a force on our side and make it part of our power syndrome. So we enclosed it in the persona of gods, beasts, mountains and rivers. We had gods for living, gods for dying, gods for heaven, and ultimate gods for war. Through the centuries of savagery and evolution, these gods reigned supreme, until in the West about 6,000 years ago, a momentous occurrence happened. Out of the deserts of the Middle East, there arose a number of different tribes looking for a homeland. These were the Jews. Highly intelligent and warlike, some amongst them realized that to weld them into a formidable force, the old competitive gods had to be gotten rid of and one god raised up to rule them all. This was and is the supreme God that created the cosmos, the world, and everything in it, who created man, woman, and rested on the seventh day. This was a logical creation born out of the illogic of a plethora of gods and born of the astute realization that the human psyche deserved a focal point for the recognition of a spiritual entity. But the gods inventors, being human, had only a human template on which to mould their god, and the principal attributes were power, control, and a terrible anger. But as well as that power and anger, there was vast civilization attributes to its role. When Moses came down the mountain, his ostensibly 10 Commandments laid the basis for an enduring social contract between God and his people. The first commandment, however, laid the basis for all the others. 9 deals with a fair and just society that endures to this day. But the first commandment, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, the claims to ultimate power, whose interpretation by earthly leaders was sacrosanct. Depending on how we looked at it, this was a God for war and peace, and because it was the Jews who discovered him, it is only fair that he be the exclusive God of the Jews, and they his chosen people. And as reward, he promised them a land of their own, a holy land. That such a promise had to rely on force of arms did not strike anyone as somewhat incongruous. Such a God of power could have given the land to them, but didn't. They had to fight hard and conquer, and only then did God give it to them. Of course, that really happened, an astute Jewish leader took the all-powerful God they had invented and used him as a spiritual power force to further their materialistic goals, to provide a homeland, a kingdom for a tribal people. Success came as a reward from that God. Defeats were caused by a lack of faith and religious practice. This belief still holds. However, having established the God became necessary to have him survive the ensuing generations. And this effort gave rise to the Bible, the Old Testament, or the Book, a collection of Jewish and ancient Middle Eastern history that has the God intertwined with history and geography, and those who study it confuse the fable of the God with the reality of the geography. The fact that a mountain still stands in a certain area today does not prove that there was a God who sat on top of it. But these are the stories which only bears out what Plato said. The people were told what to think and probably forbidden to think for themselves, or in the case with most, when people are blinded by faith, prejudice, or hubris, it doesn't occur to them to think or question. However, such has been the drive and influence of the book that it has survived ages with the logic of its God unquestioned. Yet despite its faults, it did contribute to the emergence of more civilized society and kept alive the knowledge of the existence of the Spirit, though not an understanding, in the minds of men in our Western world. The story of Genesis from the Bible is the defining picture of the invented God, a God that created a world, Adam and Eve, and all the things of perfection, yet in his terrible anger destroyed it. This displayed a harsh and terrible aspect of the God, and one that the storytellers had to alleviate. So they invented the story of a son, the Messiah, who would come to the Jewish people, who would die and be offered as a sacrifice to the God in reparation for man's disobedience, and everything would be right again. The picture of a God woven on the loom of man's materialistic understanding. Not even a reasonable story and a terrible depiction of a merciful God. But it was a story that demanded some hope and redemption for man. It was this hope for redemption that gave rise to the prophecy of a Messiah, the Son of the God they had invented, coming to save them. Not a great basis for hope, and yet from that came the foundation story of the greatest human being who ever lived, Jesus Christ.